Today in Draw My Life, the true story of Ladybug and Cat Noir. We know you're a fan of the truth, and even more so when it's related to scary events. I mean, what would Draw My Life be if we didn't tell you those stories that nobody wants you to know? So hit the subscribe button and sit tight because Ladybug and Cat Noir are not the cartoonish heroes from France that everybody thinks. If there's one thing that the miraculous animators don't want you to know, it's how such the fantastic idea for their cartoons originated. Because not everything is as fun and happy as it seems. To understand what I mean, we have to go back to the origins of Marionette and Adrienne. Warning, they're pretty grotesque. The animators based their story in two roommates in a psychiatric hospital in the legendary French capital. According to what our informant tells us, Marionette had come to the facility after a judge decided that her serial murders were due to her declining mental state. Marionette, before being admitted to the hospital, was wanted by the Parisian police. The innocent-looking girl had been responsible for more than 23 murders in the capital. All of them had the same terrifying characteristic, the purple stains on the corpses. Ever since she was a little girl, her mother had noticed that her daughter had a strange obsession with the ladybugs that sat on the window in her room. Marionette would admire them intensely, and then with her finger, she would crush them, leaving small dots of blood that decorated her window frame. Her first victims were ladybugs, but as she got older, her victims also got bigger. First, it was a squirrel, then a dog, and finally, a human. Her obsession with blood grew and her thirst for killing followed her. Everything changed when she discovered on the internet an extremely strong poison that guaranteed a slow death to her victims. So many became her victim that this death became known as Ladybugs Kiss, because those who came across her were wrapped in this eternal kiss, a kiss with a lot of poison, that only with a slight contact paralyzed your body, leaving you to constant convulsions until all your blood coagulated, leaving hundreds of bruises all over your skin, like the spots that define a ladybug. After being imprisoned, she was placed in a psychiatric hospital. She had been diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, psychosis, and depression. She spent the first few years of confinement alone, and some doctors noticed some improvement until her roommate, Adrienne, arrived. Adrienne had a similar background to Marionette, but was much older than her. He had been in the psychiatric facility for 10 years. This was the 7th time he had been moved from one room to another, as he had tried to murder all his fellow roommates during his psychotic attacks. He was known as the Black Cat, and was responsible for more than 60 murders in France. None of the police who came across him survived to tell the story, except for the policeman who arrested him and the psychiatrist who treated him. He had a peculiar look. His eyes were yellow due to a kidney problem and chronic alcoholism. He showed himself to his victims in the darkness of the night, dressed in black. He would stab them, pull out their entrails, and then bury them. He would usually revisit their bodies until they decomposed. Some say the smell of decay calmed him, and that's how he was caught, sleeping on top of one of his corpses. In fact, if they had found him awake, they would have not been able to get him. When Adrienne entered Marionette's room, the nurses were already alert, as he was showing the same psychotic patterns he had had with his previous partners. They could guess that he was planning Marionette's death. Vigilant, the nurses increased his dose of sedatives, which in turn made him hallucinate. Adrienne spoke incoherently, and between some words, he could be heard saying hero and Cat Noir repeatedly, words that had stuck in Marionette's subconscious and would later provoke strong and prolonged delusions in her schizophrenic episodes. Soon, the nurses noticed that the sheets of their beds were laid out and often found hanging around their necks like capes. They jumped from bed to bed, shouting incoherent ramblings that only in their hallucinations made sense. Adrienne had found in Marionette a partner who understood him, even in his gory ways, and now he didn't feel alone in the world he had created. One day, they decided that the time had come to seal the friendship. So to do so, Marionette and Adrienne wait until lunchtime to receive their meal. On the tray, they were served vegetables, potatoes, meat, and some fruit. Next to it was a can of soda that Adrienne had earned for his good behavior. When they were handed their trays, Adrian quickly took the can, emptied it, and began to bend it until it broke. With a piece of metal, he began to cut into Marionette's back a symbol they had made up during their hallucinations. Once he finished, Marionette began to do the same with her partner. At the end of the lunch hour, the nurse returned and found a bloody room with the two friends laughing desperately. The nurse panicked and quickly ran to alert the doctor, who, along with other nurses, managed to tie them up and administer intravenous sedatives. The next few days, Marionette and Adrian were separated and under the effects of the strong sedatives. In their bed, they drooled, babbled incoherently, and occasionally peed themselves. After a few weeks apart, the friends were once again reunited in the room. Traumatized by the doctors' and nurses' treatment, they decided to never return to that world. So that night, while no one was monitoring them, they took their eyes out to remain in their fantasy. They were Ladybug and Cat Noir, the heroes of Paris. They caught the immoral with their poison, unraveled them, and buried them. After, they would turn these criminals to the police. Did you know the terrifying story of Ladybug and Cat Noir? Let us know in the comments if you were as terrified as we were, or if you were much more interested. And remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next one.